Mitch McConnell now sees the stimulus checks matter, but his reasoning is not exactly a little faulty. He says the GOP Senate race in Georgia is reason enough for Congress to work hard to hammer out a COVID relief deal.
Pretty interesting comments there, but is it too late? Democratic strategist and council member at large from Montgomery County, Maryland, Will Jawando, and senior policy analyst with the Independent Women's Forum, Inez Stepman, are here to talk about it. So great to see both of you guys.
Good to see you guys.
Good to be here.
Will, let me start with you. The numbers in Georgia are actually pretty incredible in terms of the turnout seems to be historic of what we know so far. There's actually been more in terms of early voting than we have the other tweet that says more in early voting than was on the first day of early voting in the general election. This one shows who is voting so far. Black turnout currently better than the general election percent. Ultimately, if it holds, Dems are off to an amazing start, is this person's take anyway. But so McConnell is clearly nervous about these races, Will, and that is part of why he is wanting to put these stimulus checks in, why he's playing ball on stimulus at all. What do you make of all of this?
Well, absolutely. You know, a lot to process there. Let's start with Senator McConnell, who, tepidly recognized the president and vice president-elect. I think it was disgusting to me when President Trump put his signature and name and sent out his letters on the last round of personal checks. Something unprecedented to try to influence an election. Here you have Senator McConnell taking a page out of his book. And while his names won't be on the checks, if they are issued, which are needed, let me start with that. The folks are dying and need this support right now. But I think it's really horrible. And he probably would take it back if he could. But I think it speaks to he understands the stakes. He's willing to use whatever tactics necessary to try to deliver a victory in Georgia. And he knows it's tight. And so I think when you look at those numbers, I mean, African Americans, about 32% of the population in Georgia, outperforming their population. White residents, about 60% underperforming. Again, there's white Democrats and there's black Republicans, but you know where the numbers skew. I think that's a good start for early voting, and we'll see how it plays out. But we're certainly in the ballgame.
Yeah, I mean, Inez, here's the way I read it, which is that, so McConnell understands that stimulus checks are important to people's election prospects. He just didn't care enough to do anything whenever Trump was running for re-election and actually held up a lot of those payments. What does that tell you here? Which is that he's willing to break ideology to save the Senate, but not in order to keep the presidency.
Look, I mean, these comments really reminded me of Nancy Pelosi's comments, just a few weeks ago when she said, we have a different president now. Now we can work on the stimulus. I'm kind of a pox on both your houses on this. This should have been done a long time ago, excluding the two issues that are actually causing the friction. Right. Not that they're not important issues, but excluding those things and working on the things that everybody seems to agree on more or less, which are direct stimulus payments as well as refunding PPP, right? And unemployment insurance and so on. These are things that the American people desperately need, particularly with going into a second round of shutdowns. And, there isn't really an excuse for I don't know. I know we're talking about politics here and how this plays in Georgia. And yes, I agree with you. It's important. And obviously McConnell's probably right that it is important, but it's really frustrating to hear this from politicians now, just like it was frustrating to hear it from Nancy Pelosi in the past when, people are really hurting out there. This is legitimately a crisis. You guys know I'm not like a big spender. I do believe in fiscal responsibility. This is really a crisis. This is the time when government needs to step in, when they've shut down people's businesses, when they've shut down people's ability to work because of the pandemic. Like, this is the crisis for which this kind of spending is appropriate. And it's frustrating to see it be a political football, both for Nancy Pelosi and for Mitch McConnell.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, Will, I think your comments are correct that, it's amazing how crass, that you just feel comfortable to admit that really the only reason you're doing anything is because of political reasons. Now, ultimately,
fine. Right?
Ultimately, exactly. If it gets it done, great. You should be doing a lot more than $600. He's still trying to just throw out the scraps rather than actually give people the security that they need to get through this thing. We have record-breaking deaths just yesterday. But it is remarkably blatantly crass. the way that he played this was saying, directly that basically we got to do this so that Kelly and David, the senators from Georgia, are able to make it through their races. And it also, I think to Inez's point, it was incredibly crass the way that Pelosi played this. Prior to the election, she knew that if she really negotiated in good faith and gave Republicans a chance to pass a stimulus deal, not to say that they would have gotten their act together to do it, but she ultimately was the gating item on that one. And then immediately after the election, she's like, well, things are different now that Joe Biden's elected, so now we actually want to work together on stimulus. It is grotesque how just purely, blatantly political the negotiations around all of this have been, rather than, actually caring about the people who are going hungry and afraid of getting kicked out of their homes.
Yeah, I agree with the underlying point. I will point out a pretty big difference in that the House had passed the HEROES Act and was waiting for the Senate to take up legislation. And the two items that are and the reason Pelosi was holding, and I actually agree with you, I agreed, take whatever you can get right now, because as a state and local elected official, folks need it right now. But they were holding out for a bigger deal to help more people.
Yeah, but how did that work out, Will? Now they've got a smaller deal, and there's no state and local aid. How'd that work?
You. I'm not. That's why I was for passing whatever we could get. I'm just saying, if we talk about the motivations, whereas Mitch McConnell's holding out for liability protection for corporations and not wanting to give us state and local governments the money to help keep people in their homes, they're still using that as a political football. So I just think I understand, I agree, but it's kind of different motivations there.
Yeah, I mean, it can be different motivation, but the effect on people is the same, right? I mean, and that's ultimately what happened, and that was the thing, Inez, which makes me so angry about that. And Pelosi's holding up this deal up in the beginning. And look, McConnell and them didn't even want to pass anything, so they're not off the hook either. But at that time, $1.8 trillion was on the table. Now, I mean, the best you're going to get is $900. That's literally half. I mean, that's not, very good negotiation on behalf of people, but it's a great negotiation if all you want is political calculus out of it, right?
So two things. One, I'm not sure that the $600 check, that's probably the most popular part of this bill, right, along with PPP. That's also really, really small. I agree with, believe it or not, I agree with Sanders and Hawley on this one. That's not going to fill the hole for a lot of Americans. I'd like to see it as the Sanders-Hawley amendment or the idea that they're pushing has. It has a cap, an income cap. Last time the stimulus went out to everyone. I know that was done in the interest of speed and not in getting it out quickly out the door.
There was a cap last time as well.
Like, I got a check and I donated it because I felt so gross about it. I mean, I didn't need a check. My income stayed the same throughout this pandemic. We have a work from home class that is doing fine financially during this pandemic. I'm fine with the stimulus amount being higher. But for folks who actually need it and not people who are like me, like probably a lot of us here at this team are doing fine during this pandemic. We don't need this additional check. But for people who do, $600 seems like everything is helpful, but it seems a bit a slap in the face to me. So in terms of the two issues that Republicans and Democrats are fighting over, one, I'm not a deep expert in liability issues, but companies, in order to open, this is probably something more important when we do start to reopen after this initial shutdown. Sure. Especially small businesses can't afford to be sued for the spread of corona. Assuming they take usually these kinds of liability protections, assuming they take all given precautions. For example, they'll have a standard for taking precautions. It's not a license to not be careful. But that being said, your restaurant can't afford to be sued because somebody caught coronavirus there. Mm-hmm. And then in terms of bailing out states, right? This is a crisis, but states are responsible for their spending records, going back decades, and their spending decisions going back decades. And I actually am with conservatives and with Republicans on it. I don't see as part of this crisis. I see it as kind of taking advantage of the crisis to say we should bail out, California and New York for their spending decisions for the last 3 decades, as opposed to the very immediate things that are
I'm
at
sorry.
issue right now.
I've got to push back on that. That's just not the case. I mean, we have a AAA bond rating here. We have $500 million in reserves in Montgomery County, Maryland, $500 million. We have better credit than the federal government. And the idea that the $183 million that we're spending, we spend in the first CARES Act, which is all encumbered, that we don't need it for our residents, many of whom are hungry, food lines out the door here in one of the wealthiest counties in America. The idea that other places around the country are not going to use this money to go directly to people, that's not true. And I just think it's corrosive. And if you think $600 isn't enough, which I agree, Because people are $4, $5, $6, $7, $8, $9, $10,000 back for their rent. We need that money to get them money so that they can pay landlords, pay their rent, get their food bills paid, childcare, go down the list, and that's what we're using that money for.
Sure.
So I don't think that should be a political.
Just 1 second, Ness, because I hear this.
Funnel it through the state governments where they can use it for all kinds of things. And by the way, yes, there are. I don't know in particular in Maryland, but there have been a lot of programs floated that have nothing to do with the pandemic, funding previous commitments, right, for state governments. Yes. And I don't see, if we're talking about helping people directly, I'm very open. I'm not in the Senate, obviously, I'm not an elected official, but I would be very open to that negotiation. But I'm not open to, funding the bad decisions of states going back decades. I think
this is something, I've said this a million times, I keep hearing from these Republicans. They're like, well, we're not going to bail out California's pension system. I'm like, okay, so don't, just tie the aid to something different. But, that would require like actual good faith in a lot of these negotiations, and I don't see any of that. So we're going to have a little bit more Rising right after this. Stick with us, guys.